Greetings, I'm Dr. Beverly Rubik, and I'm going to speak to you today about wireless radiation, 5G, and our health. So let's get started. Well, as you know, there's been a proliferation of wireless devices all around us, from computers to routers that feed them wireless to smartphones to tablets and also smart meters, which are in our home as well as our schools and our businesses. So, in addition, there are also antennas and stations out there delivering wireless. So we have a lot of sources of wireless in our environment. And when did this all start? Well, personal computers started back in 1997. It wasn't until 1992 when broadband began. And the first generation of wireless, which also brought us the first cell phones and towers, 1G, generation 1, was 1996. Then 2G came in 1998 with the introduction of low orbit satellites. And in 2001, Wi-Fi came, and that was the third generation of wireless. 2007 brought us smartphones. We had also smart meters around that same time. And just last year, 2019, was the beginning of the fifth generation or 5G wireless. And basically, we've just added technology. We haven't taken anything away. And we still live today with 2G, 3G, and 4G. And 5G will depend upon 4G in particular as well. 5G gives us supposedly faster download speeds, self-driving vehicles, and virtual and augmented reality, and the Internet of Things, whereby just about everything we know will be connected to the wireless World Wide Web, so that we have more and more signals of wireless radiation all around us. And with this, there's an infrastructure on the Earth of 5G antennas and stations, also fiber optic cables, which are wired carrying signals of 5G, and that's not a disruption to our health. We should be grateful for any time when there is fiber optics carrying 5G. It's completely safe. It carries signals of light. And the power supplies to all of these things. And you can see antennas on top of telephone poles and also light posts. Some of the power supplies look sort of like a mailbox in configuration. And these things are being installed right now all over our neighborhoods, near schools, near our homes, approximately every 1,000 feet, so they say, they're going to be installed. And they're still in progress. In addition, there are some 42,000 5G satellites that are going to be launched into low Earth orbit. And so this will be an enormous number of satellites, more than we've ever had before, that will bring the entire world online in a wireless way. Right now, several companies are involved in this. SpaceX, which is Elon Musk's company, another company called OneWeb, and Amazon. These are the companies launching these satellites, excuse me, which have been approved by the Federal Communications Commission, and some of them are already in orbit and working as of October 2020. There is a bit of a race for 5G. We're somewhat competing with China. In my lifetime, we've had the space race with Russia, the arms race with Russia, and now we have the race for 5G largely with China and its company called Huawei. And I would say China is probably leading the race. And there's an estimated trillions of dollars to be made with 5G, hence there's an economic push. And our federal government has mandated a fast track without really adequate study of environmental and health impact, in my opinion. And so we have this competition ongoing with China. There are some laws that you ought to know about. One is called the Wireless Communications Act of 1996, signed into law by President Clinton, which prohibited local governments, state and city and county, from actually considering the health effects when considering proposed wireless installations. In other words, they can really only consider the placement, the aesthetics of the wireless installation, but not really talk about environment or health as long as the devices that are about to be installed satisfy the Federal Communications Commission regulations. And then there was a ruling in September 2018 that the federal government is really in complete control of 5G rollout. So there's actually very little that local governments can do about it without changing the law or without contesting them in court. And there are some lawsuits going on, but there's no results from those suits yet. So the fast tracks of 5G is underway, and there's been no environmental review of the impact of these antennas and stations and all of these devices, although according to many, it should be required by the National Environment Policy Act, or NEPA, that goes back to 1969, because this is really a drastic change in our environment, and it should be reviewed for its impact. So this year and next year, 2020 and 21, we expect 5G rollout. It's already happening worldwide. It's in Wuhan, China, for example, was there even before the pandemic. And so we're talking about 5G antennas, 5G satellites, 5G routers that will deliver Wi-Fi in homes, schools, and businesses, and 5G smartphones, which are about to be introduced any day now. So why is 5G different? It's different because it's a planned total coverage of the Earth. It's going to bring millions of antennas and thousands of satellites beaming 5G frequencies. It involves moving focus beams of higher power. It includes higher frequency millimeter waves that have been used by the United States military for both radar as well as weapons, some of the same frequencies. And really only very expensive military grade instruments can measure the highest frequencies of 5G. And the average person doesn't have access to that. So most people won't really know about their exposure to 5G. Here's a comparison of broadcasting, which is 4G, casting radiation broadly to in the environment to various users. And that's what we've been using with 2G, 3G, and 4G. But 5G involves sending pencil beams from stations and antennas directly to users and then moving them around to other users, going back to initial users. It's a much more intense beam of radiation, and it's been going to be passing literally through our residences, etc., on and off all of the time, which is something very difficult for living systems to get used to. Signals that go on and off, such as these beam-forming signals of 5G. And here's something to consider. In nature, there's virtually none of these frequencies of 5G or even 4G. The building biologists talk about 100,000 times over nature being an anomaly and 10 million times a severe anomaly. But we've got a lot of extreme anomalies already. I can measure this with 4G meters, and still we're below the trillions of times above background or nature that are the US guidelines for exposure. Way out here, 3 trillion times above nature. So you see, even though these figures of microwatts per square centimeter sound very small, because micro is a tiny, tiny number, we are still trillions of times above the natural background of millimeter waves and microwaves coming from 4G and 5G. And here is a chart of the electromagnetic spectrum. So we're talking about radiation in the radio wave region down here and the non-ionizing region, microwaves, and just above it are the millimeter waves of 5G. So 4G is microwaves, 5G is some microwaves and some millimeter waves. Now, electromagnetic fields can be harmful or healthy. You probably know the sun is beneficial, even though some people think it's dangerous, but we really need the infrared and the visible light coming from the sun. The ultraviolet light burns us. It's a little more harmful, and we use things to screen it. These natural fields are analog and continuous, whereas 4G, 5G, 3G are digital signals that are pulsed extremely rapidly on and off, on and off. It's like me standing at a light switch and turning it on and off with great rapidity in a random fashion, and your eyes will be flabbergasted at such signals. You'll say, stop, stop. Either turn it on or turn it off. But we're blasting our bodies with such signals, very rapid pulsed modulated signals that are digitally conveying information. And no living thing can adapt to this. It's simply very disruptive. Now we have about 7 billion cell phones worldwide. And what can we say about that? Well, there's just about one for every person on earth right now. And it really bothers me when I see young children holding cell phones to their heads because of the radiation that can literally damage their developing brains. And we also see people with cell phones strapped to their heads, in their chest pocket, right near their heart, in their pants pockets near their gonads, that can cause harm to those organs. It's become the main personal communication device used worldwide, but we're not using them in a smart fashion. Consider what happens when you put a cell phone to your head, as shown here. Well, microwaves as well as millimeter waves can penetrate, and young children have skulls that are only a half a millimeter thick, and the radiation can penetrate deeply. And we know from many studies in biology that young developing organisms are much more sensitive to this radiation. The 10-year-old has a bit thicker skull, but still there's more penetration than in the adult. And so young children are much more at risk to the penetration of this radiation deep in the brain and uh, damages to the central nervous system accordingly. And we know that wireless radiation, together with chemical toxins from our environment, can damage the brain. First of all, microwaves from 4G and also 5G can open something called the blood-brain barrier. This is a barrier that keeps out certain chemicals from our brain, which may be toxic, for example, things like Roundup or glyphosate. But when the blood-brain barrier is damaged, then such chemicals can actually enter the brain. And so this is a problem because those chemicals are unhealthy and can cause damage to our brains. So we have a 1-2 punch. On the one hand, we have wireless radiation, which is thwarting our central nervous system in itself. But on the other hand, it can open up the blood-brain barrier and allow chemical toxins also to damage us. And we have no safety standards for wireless. We have only something called guidelines. The Federal Communications Commission, which consists of a team of about 6 members, does not have any physicians or scientists. It largely has people from the telecom industry, the engineers who know about wireless but not about health. And so when we talk about guidelines, what is safe for whom? We have to consider age, pregnancy, the years of exposure, the individual dosage. And we know radiation dosages are cumulative. So what about human health? And I already mentioned the impossibility to adapt to pulsed digital signals. How are the phones used and how are they carried on the body or in the pocket? We don't really know the long-term effects of such digitally pulsed modulated microwaves and millimeter waves. So this is a very complex question with no consensus among the scientists. Although the industry will tell you that it's safe, but independent scientists have found different results in their own studies. Here's a profile of society and its uses of wireless. So we see pregnant women often holding tablets or cell phones right near their bellies, or women with children who are holding those cell phones near the baby's heads, often holding the baby in one arm and the cell phone in another arm. We see children playing with tablets and cell phones, given these things like pacifiers, which I consider really inappropriate because of the radiation hazard. The official view on exposure guidelines and safety, both from the telecom industry and our Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, talks about something called the specific absorption rate of, for example, handheld wireless phones, is only based on tissue heating. They are not considering what we call non-thermal effects other than heating. And this value is not to exceed 1.6 watts per kilogram. And the FCC is maintaining the same level, which has been around for almost 20 years for 5G. They're not changing it. We ignore non-thermal effects in the United States, but Russia and Eastern Europe considers them, and their guidelines are for exposure are 100 times lower than the United States. It's interesting to note that U.S. insurance companies do not insure cell phone providers due to the health risks. There are a number of health effects of wireless due to non-thermal effects. So I've listed a number of them here. DNA damage, mutations, altered gene expression, reduced sperm count and fertility, detrimental effects on fetal and child development, neurological changes including brain degeneration and cognitive impairment, learning and memory deficits such as attention deficit disorder, oxidative stress and death of cells, cardiovascular effects, metabolic and immune system disruption, eye and skin damage. And the World Health Organization has classified wireless as a class 2B human carcinogen. And we see evidence of tumors such as gliomas and acoustic neuromas, cancers. So the non-thermal effects of wireless radiation are well documented. There are actually thousands of studies, including unclassified or declassified US military studies. Here's one good website where you can look at almost 2,000 references. www.bioinitiative.org, and they've updated recently in 2020 all of these references. There's also the Glaser report that was prepared for the military back in 1971 and is available online. And Europe also has various documents that you can read. There are numerous effects, therefore, of 4G and 5G, and here are just a basic list. Disruptions of the immune system, cardiovascular effects, neurological effects, effects on the blood, behavioral effects, metabolic effects, and others. And there is a phenomena called electrosensitivity where some people really can't work around these devices. Some 3 to 6% of the world population is supposedly sensitive to such radiation, and the number is increasing. There are common symptoms that people report ranging from headaches, feelings of anxiety, irritability, sleep problems, restlessness, brain fog, difficulty concentrating, memory issues, ringing in the ears, also called tinnitus, heart palpitations and arrhythmias, depression, fatigue, and others. You don't have to have all of these symptoms to have electrosensitivity. People frequently have it, and they simply go to the doctor, and doctors don't know about this, so they get medication instead of looking to the cause, which may be their wireless devices in their own homes and schools and businesses. Now I'd like to tell you about my study on 4G health effects. I conducted the study and published it back in 2014. And my research question was simply this: is the blood affected by short-term exposure to a smartphone? It was an exploratory pilot study. No one had ever really looked at this in humans over in the way that I did. Some 10 adults were selected, ranging in age from about 21 to 75. And I used a single smartphone using 4G and studied the blood of each of these people, taking samples at baseline before they ever touched a cell phone, and then 45 minutes after carrying the cell phone in a backpack. Um, the cell phone was turned on, but it wasn't used in the carrying condition. And then 45 minutes in active use, where they held the cell phone in one hand and worked with it with the other hand, and made 2 5-minute phone calls, holding it near the head, but not touching the head. I withdrew blood samples from the fingers or toes and photographed the blood under dark field microscope. There's a picture of my microscope in this slide. And there you see on the computer screen blood as seen in dark field microscopy. You see the outline of the red blood cells. So people made a finger prick using a sterile lancet, and the blood sample was prepared on a slide. And I saw images like this. This is normal, healthy blood where all the red blood cells are seen as circles here. The plasma is seen as clear and clean, and there's a white blood cell there in the center caught in the act of moving toward 2 o'clock. So here is some data. This is a 75-year-old woman. Her blood at baseline, it looks pretty good for an elderly person. The blood cells are rounded and mostly separate. What happened in the carrying condition? All the blood cells were stuck together in what we call rouleau, rolls. It's like looking at a roll of coins on edge. And those cells do not travel very well through the microcirculatory system. In fact, um, they can't deliver oxygen and remove waste or and bring food because they simply must go single file through those tiny microcapillaries. And in the post-use condition, after 45 minutes of using the phone, the rouleau broke apart, but the cells were now misshapen. And you can see that the cells membranes are no longer perfect circles, but disheveled and spiky. And we call these cells echinocytes in hematology. So we went from normal blood to stuck together red blood cells to misshapen, radically misshapen red blood cells that are actually pathological. And I saw that in others. In this case, a 55-year-old male shows fairly normal blood at baseline. The carrying condition, his blood was not quite as sticky, but it did show aggregates. And in the post-use condition of the cell phone, his cells showed spiky blood cells, the echinocytes. So to summarize my results, I found changes in 9 out of 10 subjects, and these subjects were aged 20 to 75, showing unhealthy blood changes following cell phone exposure, radiation exposure. And the exposure was only 45 minutes and then 45 more minutes using the cell phone. So 90 minutes total exposure is pretty short term. And as I said, the cells first aggregate, and upon further exposure, the aggregates broke down and the cells changed shape in an unhealthy fashion. So this study has been published. You can find it in the Journal of the Weston A. Price Foundation called Wise Traditions in Food Farming and the Healing Arts, Volume 15, Issue 4, page 19 to 28 in year 2014. And you can find it, it's open access on the westonaprice.org website. Well, after all, we are energy beings. We are electrochemical beings, and we are sensitive to energy from other living beings, from the earth, from the sun, and from our technology. And unnatural frequencies from the technology, especially wireless, can aggravate us, including every cell in our body, because they all have membrane potentials. They're electrical in nature, not just the nervous system, but every cell. And I did some studies also on the human biofield. I have various devices that examine the health of the biofield, the human energy field, that look at the whole field from investigating each of the 10 fingertips. This device is called BioWell. You can take a look at bio-well.com if you're interested. It's a commercial device from Russia. And through all 10 fingertips, it plots the energy field of a human. So here is a healthy energy field from a person before exposure to wireless radiation. And here's what happens after 30 minutes of wireless radiation. As you can see, the biofield is rather disheveled and has some spikes and some gaps and a very spiky look to it, which is evidence of stress in the energy field. There are also environmental fields from wireless radiation from our technology. Plants show stress-related biochemicals, for example, in crops and tomato plants. We see that the insects, especially the pollinators, are very sensitive to wireless radiation. They actually communicate in the millimeter wave region. And so 5G especially thwarts our insects and may disturb the pollinators. And with that, we would expect agriculture to be rather affected. It's also been shown that microbes actually get stimulated by these frequencies, especially the pathogenic microbes. And we might expect then a rise in antibiotic resistance and excess growth of these proliferating pathogenic microbes. Not a good thing. So I'm not the only scientist concerned about these things. There's growing health and environmental concerns concerning 5G deployment. There's been an international 5G appeal launched by some 231 scientists and MDs. You can go to the website www.5gappeal.eu to see this, and I'm sure that there's even more scientists who've signed by now. There's been moratoriums on 5G in Brussels, in Belgium, in parts of Switzerland, and parts of Rome and Germany. But in the United States, we are moving forward with it, much to my dismay. And I really think we need a moratorium because we need to study the environmental impact of this and reconsider the effects on human health as well as other animals and plants. There are some federal lawsuits that have taken place. I'm aware of the Santa Fe Alliance for Public Health and Safety that was initiated in December 2018, and that numerous cities around the country have sued the federal government over jurisdiction issues because they consider their local health of their people to be within their own domain. And if the federal government is taking that away from them with the Telecom Act of 1996, they've expressed concerns with these lawsuits. So cities such as Mill Valley, California, and San Jose, California are among those cities who have lawsuits in progress. And there's also an international appeal to stop 5G on Earth as well as in space. So here's a website, 5gspaceappeal.org. And you can sign this appeal. It's ongoing. We have hundreds of thousands of signatures from people around the world that have signed on. And everybody can sign it. So I encourage you go to this website, 5gspaceappeal.org, and also sign to stop 5G in space because it's going to change the electromagnetic environment of the Earth and our atmosphere forever once we launch 42,000 satellites delivering technological frequencies that were never part of life on Earth. There are some extreme views on 5G. I'll just mention them. Some people talk about the surveillance aspect of 5G because I certainly think this is so. China has a total surveillance state, and we can expect that it will be applied to surveil us as well. Some think that 5G is about an artificial intelligence takeover. Some have talked about the depopulation agenda. Some talk about targeted individuals. Some talk about directed energy weapons, and it's certainly true that there is a military weapon at 95 gigahertz in the region of 5G that, when beamed at a person, will make their skin feel like it's on fire and they will stop. So it's used for crowd dispersal. The military uses it. But one of those same frequencies is being used for 5G. So what about that? And some even consider it an extinction level event because of the effects on all life on Earth. Finally, I'd like to talk about how to stay healthy in the wireless digital era, because I do think it will be deployed, and so we have to prepare. And what are we going to do about it? It would be great to have a moratorium and explore the environmental and health aspects and further independent studies. But meanwhile, the deployment has already begun. And you can look on websites such as of telecom companies such as AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and others to find out whether 5G has been deployed in your region. So here are some strategies to stay healthy. First of all, you should be measuring levels in your home and workplace. Although there is no 5G meter for the average person, there are 4G meters that you can buy. And I'll say a little bit more about this. Finally, you can reduce your exposure to wireless radiation by taking certain measures that I will describe. And you can use protective measures that are validated by science. You can ground yourself. This is very helpful to earth your body. Put your body next to the earth, and you can replace your wireless router with a wired router. You can literally turn off wireless, at least in your home, and use wired appliances. I recommend that you get a handheld meter. It costs about $180, and here's one called the Cornet ED 88T Plus. This meter will measure radio frequencies or RF. It will also measure ELF or extremely low frequencies, both electric and magnetic fields. So it's extremely useful also for telling you about the 60 hertz radiation with respect to ordinary appliances in your environment. And it costs about $180. Our laboratory is involved in producing, or I should say, right now building a prototype of a 5G meter that would be for the public, because there's only military grade meters that cost about $100,000. So the average person simply will not know their exposure to 5G unless there are meters for sale. And so we're in the process of creating prototypes that will tell us about the various bands of 5G that we're exposed to. So that's yet to come. And we're looking for funding to complete that project, I might add. So here's another measure. You can reduce your exposure to wireless by using the measure of prudent avoidance. What this means is that you should be keeping these devices as far from your body as possible. Even 1 inch makes a big difference because the radiation decreases exponentially with distance. So 1 inch away from the body, 2 inches is better, but you can reduce the radiation dramatically by keeping it on your desk and talking using a speakerphone or with a headset. Keeping your cell phone on airplane mode as much as possible. Now, when it's on airplane mode, it is not sending signals to the antenna or satellite. So it is essentially a brick. It is no longer radiating, and it's completely safe. And if you have it on airplane mode, you can easily store it in a pocket without worry. You can also use a computer rather than a tablet or cell phone, and you can use a wired computer. You can go back to wired Ethernet DSL rather than Wi-Fi. In fact, at home and lab where I work, we never moved on to Wi-Fi. We recognized the security issues with it as well as the health hazards from it, and we stuck with Ethernet DSL. It's wired. You can go back to wires. Your provider will uh, tell you about this if you inquire. You can eliminate a wireless mouse and a wireless keyboard, and you can get wired mice and keyboards. That's much more protective. And you don't need a battery then for those things. And you can choose to use other wired technology whenever possible. If you're really concerned about things, you can protect your environment with shielding. You can get special protection for your windows and for your home. Internal paint, for example, that protects you from antennas out there. You can also wear protective shielding clothing. Clothing that looks pretty normal, but it actually has radio frequency blocker in hats and hoodies and shirts and just about everything. And one website where you can buy this, which is not mine, I'm just mentioning it uh, for the sake of ease, is lessemf.com. They have a large variety of products at reasonable retail, and here are some of those products. So there are hats, there are whole garments, there are tents that can protect you, there are mosquito type netting, which actually is a wired netting that's grounded, and even hoodies that look fairly normal, but they have silver impregnated fabric that protects you from radio frequency radiation. In China, we saw special aprons for pregnant women that protect the fetus. That's very important to do because, as I said before, developing organisms are the most vulnerable to wireless radiation. And there are a great number of purported protective devices for cell phones out there. I want to mention that many of these are marketed without adequate study by independent scientists such as myself, and that's problematic. They may say that they have science, but not to satisfy me. I want to see a peer-reviewed publication in a journal. And the real problem is that funding is lacking for studies such as this, and especially for comparative studies to compare the various devices that are on the market to know which ones are any good, or are they working perhaps synergistically to help us protect ourselves. So that's a big question mark. All those stickers for the backside of your phone or devices that you might put into your computer, memory sticks that might have so-called protection are a big question mark for me. So I say buyer beware because we really don't know if they work. And certainly whether they work for 5G is quite questionable. There are other protective measures that you can take. You can opt out of a smart meter in most states. You can go back to an analog meter if a smart meter has been installed at your home. And that would be a very smart thing to do because smart meters are not smart. They are blasting you with pulsed digital radiation all of the time, even though they say it's only happening a very short time of the day. We measured this and it's happening most of the day. As I said earlier, you can shield your home with special paint. You can even turn off your electric power each night, or you can have your wireless router on a timer so that it goes off at night and comes on during the day. And that way you're not exposed while you sleep. I certainly think that children should not use wireless devices. We should ban Wi-Fi in our schools, but that's not happening. Children are using Wi-Fi even before they go to kindergarten because their parents give it to them, and it's frankly dangerous. They should not be using them. And even baby monitors have wireless aspects. Go back to wired monitors. It's far safer for your baby. Something else we can do is called earthing or getting grounded. We can put our bodies, our feet especially, on the ground or walk on the sand on the beach. We can literally get grounded again because with wireless, we are far removed from being grounded and it's unhealthy. Our bodies were meant to be close to the earth, and we've gotten very far from that with synthetic carpeting and clothing that holds static charge, and all of it is really unhealthy. So Grounding ourselves, there's grounding shoes that you can buy, grounding sheets, grounding clothing, and all of these things promote better sleep, less pain, reduced stress, improved immune function, and they may combat the stress of electromagnetic fields, or EMFs, including wireless. So in conclusion, the radiation from wireless technology poses hazards to our health, as I discussed here. Some people more than others, especially the pregnant women and children and the elderly. But we are all at risk and we are all getting exposed, and that exposure, like other radiation, is cumulative. So that we must consider the cumulative radiation to which we've been damaged, and we never get a rest from it. It's always with us. We can expect that 5G is going to be more hazardous than 4G or 3G. For one, it requires the proliferation, or what's called the densification, of 4G antennas in our very neighborhoods and near our schools. And that's problematic. In addition, there will be 4G antennas that are called small cell antennas that will blast us with millimeter waves, a whole new, faster waveform that consists of many bands that go all the way up to 95 gigahertz. And with the Internet of Things that is promised by 5G, the 5G and densification of 4G system will be much more extensive. It will involve higher frequencies and it will bring the whole world into the wireless World Wide Web with an Internet of Things. Many, many things that we own will be online and surveilled. And so this extensiveness makes it quite unique. We need to take personal action through advanced self-care to protect ourselves. And I went over the various ways that are scientifically validated that you can protect yourself. The most important thing is to use prudent avoidance, to turn your cell phone on airplane mode as frequently as possible when you're not using it, to keep it far from the body, even when you're using it, to use wired appliances whenever possible, because what's in our immediate environment is even harming us more. There's a larger amount of radiation coming from our own personal technology than there is from antennas and stations out there. So we can take control of that by limiting our use, prudent avoidance. We can reduce our wireless exposure by choosing wired appliances, and we can use other proven measures of protection such as earthing to improve our overall well-being. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have questions or comments, you can take a look at my websites and you can find my email there. I wish you well. Be safe. Bye for now.